So I'm very pleased to introduce you now to our first keynote speaker. He is described as the world-only thriller engineer. He originally trained as a military aeronautical engineer before researching and teaching interaction design at the Royal College of Art. He runs Ariel,
yes.
Is that pronounced correctly? A design practice specializing in creation of tailored emotional experience. He is a regular contributor to TV programs, and he now has a series on Channel 4 which is called The House That the 50s Built. And you can find it on Channel 4 online, I believe. And now he is also Professor of Creative Industries at Middlesex University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brendan Walker.
That's right, gosh. It's fine, I think the lights, I'm quite happy. Oops. Oopsie daisy.
Do you want me to split the fees?
I think we'll stay two up for the staircase. How does that go now? Nice. Let's see how we're doing here. Got that on. There's mine here. F5 it. Bingo. Lovely. Can everybody hear me okay if I walk around with that? Good. I'll take that as a yes. So where should we start? Let's start here.
Everybody's idea of thrill is different, whether it's sport, music, design, or even food.
So I'm going to come back to that advert from Nissan a bit later. It's all tied into the experiment we're going to be conducting. You're going to see these guys, well, there's some activity going on in the far corner. In about 30 minutes' time, going to conduct an experiment looking at the human's psychological and physiological responses to consuming food, which could be the first stage of building new interactive performances, installations, not sure, but it's going to be live in about 30 minutes. As Francesca said, I'm a thrill engineer. In fact, actually, I'm quite interested after realising the broad breadth of people in the room. Who would classify themselves as an artist in the room? Anyone? One, two, oh, looking very ashamed. Three or four. Designers? A lot. Scientists. You can be in both categories. And people predominantly with business, and food business, one of you. Okay, well, so I'm not entirely sure what I am. So I call myself a thrill engineer because it seems to encompass the designing of experience, creating stuff, even selling stuff as well, engaging with industry. And being invited to talk at Food Design 2012 really sort of made me reflect a bit on my work. I mean, immediately the first two questions that came to my mind, being a thrill engineer, was how does food thrill, and how can I create thrilling food-related experiences? Now, I probably classify myself, you know, more as a designer who engages with food on some level, and this has kind of given me the opportunity to look back over my practice over the last 12 years. And I'm actually quite surprised that food appears quite a lot in my work, even though I've never really considered myself as a food designer. I am obviously somebody who engages with food as something as part of the design process. So I'm going to show you some of my work over the last 12 years, but also I'm going to reflect on the sort of the practice, the idea of the design of thrilling experience as well. And those experiences are undoubtedly involving food. So winding the clock back about to 2005, I published two books, Thrilling Designs and The Taxonomy of Thrill. Now, the Taxonomy of Thrill, which I'll come on to, was the culmination of several years' research where I report on my attempts to understand the nature of thrill and how to design thrilling experiences. And Thrilling Designs contains a series of design explorations which I use to reflect on those kind of design guidelines I try to set out for myself. As Francesca said, I was originally trained as an industrial design engineer. I studied at the Royal College of Art, but I also spent several years working in the Interaction Design Research Studios. And this is actually a tablecloth, an interactive tablecloth. It's an electroluminescent tablecloth which was used for food, for eating food, which actually glowed the longer objects were left on them. So it's all about the ceremony of eating food. Food also appears. I also, part of my practice is building electromechanical installations, and this was a series of mannequins I produced for the artist Graham Rawle at the Expo 2000 in Hanover. This was the basic needs pavilion, and obviously eating cake is a basic human need, obviously. And I started to become, I mean, this was around, it was around 2000, I became interested or very conscious that I was becoming excited by watching people becoming excited by the mechanical things I was building. But I had no idea how to make them more engaging, how to make them more thrilling. I didn't really have command of my stuff that I was using to build stuff other than a sort of a tacit knowledge and a sort of intuition. So I started asking questions, how could I design more thrilling experiences? And about 10 years ago, in 2002, I came across an ethnocriminologist, Jack Katz, who was working at UCLA, and he specialised in crimes he classed as sneaky thrills. So people who were constructing things like shoplifting, joyriding, graffiti artists. And I met him in LA. My first reference to food is we met over sushi, sea urchin, which is very fishy. I didn't particularly like it, but it stuck in my memory because it was quite a monumental meeting, and he actually told me about a particular shoplifter. In fact, the idea of designing something that's thrilling isn't just the fact that shoplifting is thrilling. In fact, actually, if you look at all these peaks and troughs, there's a time base to designing a thrilling experience. And within something as simple as shoplifting, there are moments of engagement with an emotional experience where the first one is a shoplifter might suddenly have the idea of shoplifting, and suddenly there's a moment of euphoria and excitement and a frisson and anxiety. And then they go into the shop, again, they're in the live arena, there's a moment again of sort of a little bit of anxiety creeping in there. And then they start imagining stealing the object, putting it in their pockets. There's another burst, a little mini burst of thrill. Then they steal the object, put it in their pocket, and go to the changing rooms where they try and hide the object in their bag. Has anybody seen them? Are they evading the CCTV cameras? When they come out, they have to run the gauntlet with the shop detective. Have they been seen? And then finally, they leave the shop and they've got away with it. And that's the massive thrill at the end. So within something as simple as shoplifting, it's actually a very complex design construct. And people are doing it every day, designing their own thrilling experiences. And I believe that the same can be done with the design of any highly emotive, thrilling experience. So I went away and came up, so that's become very confusing. There are two graphs there. So my hypothesis was that, Jack's process was to actually interview criminals and to dissect their interviews and look for commonalities amongst all of their stories to see if there were any common design clues he could find. So I proposed to interview people about their own thrilling experiences, not necessarily criminal, to dissect these interviews, to create components, the stuff that could be used for design, to categorise them, to create what became the taxonomy of thrill, and then use that taxonomy to reconfigure, to create new thrilling experiences myself. And of course, this process could be applied to the design of thrilling food-related experience. So over 6 months, I conducted interviews with over 50 members of the public online. Interviews ranged from accounts of crocheting dresses to cross-dressing, from bungee jumping to bondage. And there's quite a wide range of thrilling experiences. And all those, took me another 6 months to dissect, pull apart and reassemble those into what then became the taxonomy of thrill. Now, in the taxonomy of thrill, I won't go into it in great detail, but in the taxonomy, I define thrill as a moment of sudden and intense euphoria experienced in response to novel stimulation. I discussed the temporal nature of thrill, from premeditation and anticipation, the experience of the live event, and the delicious post-thrill afterglow that you get. And I outlined 5 classes of stimuli: spectacular, sensational, power and control, social value, and mortality. And when I talk about mortality, I'm talking about the reward for the perseverance of life. And within that, I'm talking about things such as quenching extreme thirst, sating extreme hunger, or engaging in fulfilling sex. They all come within that last category. And I also discuss how to manage and use to advantage anxiety and fear, and how they can become part of the design of a thrilling experience. And so onto onto thrilling designs, where I present 2 design explorations which help me to reflect on the rules and the guides that I was trying to draw up in the taxonomy of thrill. And the first of these, again, one project I'd kind of put to the back of my mind, but it's all about food. It's Nearfile. I'll read. Nearfile is a thrilling new dining experience which fuses fantastic automation and gastronomic delights with choreography and theatrical drama. Diners flow through and participate in a sequence of gourmet experiences, each with its own thrilling tale to tell. Diners, props and food combine at points of confluence to create new thrilling experiences in each dining zone. Nearfile offers a menu of thrilling dining experiences based on industrial conveyance systems, fine cuisine and theatre. So let me take you through a few of the courses. There is the hors d'oeuvres. A satellite laden with caviar descends from the dark, accompanied by rousing patriotic songs of the emerging Red Army Choir and a resplendent dining hall. Soup. A simple, clear soup levitates and performs, gripped by unseen electromagnetic forces. Meze. Sensual Japanese service from waitresses equipped with night vision goggles. Fish. Tantalising trout portions are exquisitely prepared and carefully conveyed to your plate, but dropped. Then out of the water emerges the largest succulent tuna fillet you'd ever seen. Salad. The salad is tossed in the high-speed flow of a wind tunnel. Diners must venture from their protected air shelter to partake in this aero buffet. And dessert. Monumental cake creations are admired before diners collaborate in their enthusiastic destruction and passionate consumption. Now, all of these courses are intended to take the visitor on a choreographed emotional experiential journey, which includes some of the components from the taxonomy. Moments of spectacle, marvel, awe, amazement, visual delights, visceral pleasures of physical stimulation, a struggle with loss and regain of power and control, public performance, mortal and sometimes moral jeopardy, with an added frisson of sexual arousal. The second exploration in thrilling designs was Airlife. It was actually a theme park inspired by air disasters. Now, food doesn't make a direct appearance in Airlife, but Airlife was, so going back to my practice, so now since 2005 I've been creating stuff once again. And Airlife became a performance called Airphoria, which was a performance under the London Underground, under one of the London stations in the vaults at a place called Shunt, and it was a performance that was held at altitude at 3 metres. We recreated an aircraft cabin, and passengers were taken on a performance with an unexpected ending. Passengers, around 16 passengers, every half hour were taken into this performance space, treated to in-flight music, with personalised announcements from the captain made alongside obligatory banal in-flight movies. We all know those. But it wasn't until, so everything's going fine. As a member of the audience, everything's fine, having a nice time. But it's when the food appears that things start to go wrong. So First Officer Tomlinson wheels out the trolley of food, and on it there are rather stale cream crackers, wilted cheese, wrapped in cling film, very sweaty, and passengers are handing out this food. So having had a rather exquisite experience up to that point, they're handed something which is well, pretty nasty. Some people eat it, some people leave it on the side, some people pass it to their friends. And it's this ambiguity that actually heralds the start of the air disaster. So food is actually used, bad food, badly presented food, is actually used as a metaphor, a start of something bad which is about to happen. And quite rightly too, because the captain, the lights go out, the captain walks up and down the aisle, he selects a passenger at random, and that passenger is taken to the back of the aircraft, where they're thrown out the back. And they're obviously in a harness, but they go to a place with an uncertain end. They don't know where they're going, but it does actually have a happy ending where they get a photograph, a souvenir photograph taken in the English countryside after surviving their disaster. So food in a very small way has played a part in a much larger performance. And possibly I'm probably a little bit too preoccupied with air disasters, I'm afraid. This is an illustration I did for an in-flight magazine. Now, I did have aspirations to become an illustrator at one point, but it took me a long time because I had a very specific target audience. I only wanted to illustrate for in-flight magazines, so it took me a while to actually get my first gig. And this was an illustration I did for an article about Heston Blumenthal. But my secret reason for illustrating for an in-flight magazine was that I imagined that one day maybe it would become part of the debris of an air disaster itself. So, but still food related in some ways. Food also appears as an important element in lots of other performances I do, particularly around playing on the theme of horror and fear. This is a performance from a couple of years ago called Self-Examination, which was at the Mayhem Horror Film Festival, where selected cinema goers were wired up and monitored as they watched horror films, and their emotional state, their medical data was projected live outside the cinema so that passers-by could get a sense of the horrors that were being experienced inside. But I took great care to craft the preparation, the emotional trajectory of each of the patients. You see my orderly and I using surgical spirits, so smell is probably one of the most evocative of the senses to create a sense of thrill or any emotion. But also, I worked with a nurse who's obviously very serenely knitting. So, it's obviously that's what nurses do, they knit. She offered my patients a copy of Woman's Realm and also a lavender mint to suck on. So this is the only reference to food in this. But once they opened up Woman's Realm, it actually wasn't very nice at all. There was it was all slightly unhinged. And our nurse, who was very serene on the surface, there was something not so nice going on underneath. And it turned out that the mints that had been offered, some people then spat out the mint afterwards. Some people just blankly refused it. And it seemed to be a little bit like in the Alice in Wonderland with the pills and also in the Matrix. By consuming that, it was a fairly innocuous mint, it seemed to be that people would say it would be accepting that they were going to be going into a dark place, and people just didn't want to do that. Something as simple as a mint seemed to signify an awful lot more that was going on in the performance. Food also appears in some of my work as a place. So food as a place appears. This is a performance called The Experiment Live, which was conducted last year in the Broadway Cinema in Nottingham. It's a performance, and it was a taster for a reality horror TV show where 4 amateur paranormal investigators explore a haunted building. And again, their medical data is broadcast live to the cinema audience. Now, the investigators were sent to uncover or investigate a rather disturbing drug-induced death from 25 years earlier of a clubber who'd inhabited this basement of this building. So I'll just show you a quick clip from that.
Team possibly. Just let me get this.
Okay, again.
Can you take some readings from the
Whoa.
Yeah. Okay.
So the site of this haunting is probably of more interest.
Anthony Bartram reports. 4 brave souls are being sought to face their darkest fears. They will spend the night in the basement at one of Nottingham's most notorious haunts, Lee Rose's tea shop, said to be the home of a ghost known as the Sobbing Boy.
So it was, I chose a tea shop because there was something about the juxtaposition between a fairly innocuous place where people consume tea. It's quite a refined thing to do. People go there every day. But to create this backstory that it had once been the haunt of a dirty, seedy drug den in the basement where somebody had been horribly murdered, created the emotional tension that I needed, which I could use to humorous effect, I could use to create anxiety, fear, relief and thrill. But having somewhere like a tea shop was crucial to the performance. And I think I think that was it sort of captured the public imagination so much. I mean, that report, BBC News reported it as being a real haunting, even though it was completely fabricated. And also the tea shop has made its way into the National Paranormal Database as being the site of a real haunting. Again, people want to believe that something's not quite right about a tea shop in Nottingham. And the final piece of practice I'm going to show you is a project which is called Breathless. It's an interactive swing which was inspired by Fragonard's The Swing. I mean, the original painting reportedly depicts a fiancée riding a swing, which is then being controlled by her fiancé, the bishop, who's powering the swing with ropes. But then in the bushes here is her secret lover. So there's obviously a very exciting love triangle going on here. And I was interested in the swapping between the relationships, the social relationships that were going on there, as a way to try and generate thrill. But in my instance, you might have seen that there were some gas masks in there. My swing was actually powered by gas masks worn by the participants. The motor of the swing, the swing was motorised. It was controlled by the absolute breathing of the participants. You breathe in, the swing goes forward. You breathe out, the swing goes back. And the sound of the breathing was amplified in the space as well, so people became very conscious of the physiology of the riders and the participants in the space. And the ride experience cycled over the night, and power and control shifted between the rider, voyeur, the spectators, and often there were uncomfortable and occasionally quite thrilling results, particularly as you would be forced sometimes to watch maybe your husband or wife and their pleasure on the swing being controlled by a masked stranger at the side. So I was quite interested in the dynamics there. But food, in this instance, doesn't play a direct role, or so I thought. I mean, in all the live performances I produced, there's always an element of food. And in this instance, there was fantastic Argentinian beef burgers there. There was Dutch beer. It was an outside barbecue with a ride. It had all the trappings of a fairground. And that reminded me of some fantastic old Romany design terms that fairground showmen still talk about. This shows a plan of how a fairground is structured. And showmen talk about it in terms of the toba, which basically refers to the way the experiential journey of a visitor to the fairground, how they enter through the front gates and they're met with small rides, small stalls, games of chance, hook-a-duck, throwing darts. They move through to the midway where you've got smaller rides which can give it titillate a little bit. You might have the fun house. And then right at the back you've got the showstoppers, the big white knuckle rides. But amongst all of that, one of the vital elements is food. It's the sight of food, it's the smell of food, it's the taste of food. And they are all incredibly important components. The situation of that food within this experiential journey is something that showmen have been crafting for generations. So that takes me on to a project in 2005, which was kind of takes us into the science of thrill now. So I kind of showed you how the taxonomy of thrill has featured through my work in my own design work, designing new performances, interactive experiences. But also the science of thrill intrigues me. And in 2005, I conducted a series of studies at the fairground in a project called Punter's Auto Portraits of Fairground Thrill. Now, as an appendix in the taxonomy of thrill, I hinted at the possibility that there might be a way to measure thrill. Now this formula, so I can't help myself because I was originally trained as an engineer, but this formula, all it says, essentially, is that you will experience thrill when there's a rapid and large increase in pleasure and arousal. So pleasure is the sort of, they call the hedonistic tone, it's the sense of whether you like something or not, and arousal is the activation of the body's autonomic system, or, you know, are you physically becoming excited? So you sense thrill when there's a rapid increase in both of those together. Now, the camera I produced, the auto portrait machine, was created to take photographs when there was a rapid and large increase in arousal. And the photograph it took, it was, well, the jury was out whether it depicted moments of pleasure or displeasure. Some of the photographs were some people who looked fairly manic on the rides, others who looked clearly delighted by their experience, and others who looked, frankly, like they were kind of being murdered, really, sort of fairly horrific experiences. And it was an artistic project. I mean, it was a project that used science at its heart, but the outputs were primarily artistic. And this, I suppose, this technique of monitoring people as they conduct thrilling experiences, a little bit like the advert I showed you earlier, where I'm working with Nissan to explore the experience of driving one of their top sports cars. I've created an art out of working with people like the University of Nottingham to develop the technology which underpins all of this. And as you'll see in a moment, we'll try and apply some of this artistry, the science of monitoring thrill, in our own live experiments. But briefly, shameless plug, as Francesca said, the house the 50s built is on at the moment, and actually do catch it on 4D, because actually episode 1, which went a long time ago, is all about the innovations in food science and food design in the 50s, so that's quite good fun to catch. But my appearance on TV didn't start as just being a general engineer. It actually came from Thrill Laboratory. So people love the idea of science of monitoring stuff. And one of the first gigs I got was on children's TV. It was monitoring Blue Peter presenters riding British theme park rides, trying to work out which of the rides was the most thrilling. And here's a bit of it. You can see excite levels and fright levels at the top left. This guy's sweat levels here.
As we're coming back in now,
Heart rate.
you can see his levels of stress, his sweat levels are still incredibly high. He's still very excited, and he absolutely loved this ride.
It's not a bad one, is it, Brendan?
Yeah, go on.
So there was something wrong though. I mean, it's the first time I tried to get a score out of this. And you think that a ride that was specifically engineered to thrill should thrill for more than 4% of the time. And the BBC weren't happy. They were going, well, you know, these are the top rides. What's going on? You know, there's 4%. We should be thrilling. You know, we want scores that are like 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. You know, we want 90%. I mean, it just wasn't there. No matter how we did the experiments, people were only being thrilled 4% of the time. Now, you know, compared to, you know, other industrial processes like processing chickens, you'd want to design something that was 100% thrilling. But it was kind of impossible. And I mean, this did perplex me for a while. And I began to wonder whether the absence of food, actually, let me go back here. I'll go on to that later. Whether the absence of thrill or the absence of stimulation was a necessary part of creating that 4%. So actually, during the 96% of the other time, what was happening was a precursor to thrill. It was there was a preparation that was going on that was necessary to create those moments of intense pleasure and arousal. So, winding forward back to being invited to talk at Food Design 2012, when I was asked to give a talk, I was originally planning to do a live endoscopy using a wireless video camera. I was going to create an immersive experience for the audience where it would be a journey of food. It would be like what happens after we eat, and you know, it would form the basis of some kind of ride. But and I got quite far down this route. But the one thing that came up, which actually intrigued me more, was the instructions for patients. This idea of nil by mouth, that to conduct this endoscopy, patients had to be starved for up to 24 hours before that. And that made me remember in the taxonomy of thrill, this idea that to be thrilled by eating or to be thrilled by sating hunger required, obviously, the process of being hungry, of starvation, before you could be thrilled by food. And so, with food relation, I believe that maybe 96% of the time, even sitting down, dining or thinking about food might actually not be involved with actually putting things in your mouth. So on to the experiments that I'm going to be conducting now. And I'm just going to see if they're ready over there. How are you doing? Ready to go? Actually, if I could get my patients maybe to come and sit down. Let's see if I can get this. Excuse me one moment as I try and reconfigure the screens. We input 1. Is that you, Paul? Yeah, lovely. Okay, so we've never done this experiment before. In fact, actually doing any sort of medical monitoring live is fraught with danger. Well, or jeopardy, should I say. I've no idea what's going to work. I mean, this, at the moment, I have to say, is the start of an exploration which could result in a performance. It could result in an interactive design proposal. I don't know. It really is how I would start exploring the space of what it means, what's the relationship between people's bodies, people's minds, and consuming food. Now, our two patients here have been starved since around midday yesterday, so they're both pretty hungry. Now, I'm going to be feeding them, in a moment, 5 different types of foodstuffs. The foodstuffs have been picked, well, you'll see my choice in my shopping basket in a minute, possibly in a slightly unscientific way, but just talking to people about what might constitute 5 different thrilling things that might have different effects on people's bodies. We're not going to be feeding them anything like chili oil or anything like that. So I'll talk you through, just as they're being wired up, exactly what's being shown on screen here. So obviously, both of them, you can see their faces are going to be very apparent as they eat and consume stuff. Obviously, one of the biggest emotional cues we get is by watching people, particularly eating. On the outside, so you can actually see on their foreheads, just about, see there's some little sensors. On the inside of the 2 green rings here is the smile. Is that right, Paul? Smile's on the outside. So the smile's on the inside. So this inner green ring here represents their smile. So that's associated, quite obviously, with ideas of pleasure. The outer ring is linked to the sensors on their forehead, which is linked to the muscle group. There's the corrugator supercilii, that one, which is associated with frowning and displeasure. This red line here and the dot in the middle are related to their heart rate. The blue line here is related to their rate of change of sweat levels. That's linked to arousal. This purple line here is their thrill levels. And this map here is actually a map of it's a neurological map. We're actually sensing activation in their brain. Now, if anybody asks me straight after this, what do those different parts mean? I've got a printout, we can talk about it. But at this stage, usually what I do as a designer, I plug people in, I see what happens, and that's what's going to happen right now. So we know brain, heart, smiling, frowning, stuff going on. Are you ready to start feeding? Okay, so the first on the menu, there you go, there you go, some Manchego cheese, if you wouldn't mind serving. And in fact, actually, just as Paul cuts just one piece, both my patients believe that they're going to eat right now, but actually only one of them is going to eat, because actually what I'm interested in is the idea of empathy. So possibly watching other people eat, does that have an effect on somebody's physiology and psychology? So just in a very quick straw poll, who'd like to see Louise eat? Oh. Who'd like to see Paul eat? Oh, crikey. I think Louise is eating. Sorry, Paul. Okay. So yes, if you serve a little bit of Manchego onto their plate. And Louise, please knock yourself out with that. Well, okay. So we see some smiling going on there, and actually Paul's heart rate actually also seems to be going up quite a bit. And interesting, if you look at if you have a look at the neurological map there as well, there's loads of stuff being activated. I should actually get my notes for that. So we should move quite quickly on to our next course, I think, which is going to be, oh look, some 30-year-old Amontillado. If you wouldn't mind just pouring a little bit, please, Paul, into the red glass. You can stop eating that now, Louise. That's fine. So alcohol's a funny one. I'm not too sure. I mean, there are mixed, just from the very brief research I did, there's something linked to alcohol consumption with endorphins release, and obviously with that is pleasure. But then it also acts as a depressant. So to me, that's kind of like, there's probably two bad things going on as far as thrill's concerned. It's probably lowering arousal but increasing pleasure. Oh, have you sampled some yet, Louise? Yes, if you would take a little, or even a rather large, maybe a little sip first. It's quite nice. So that the brain there, let's see, that those top two segments there which keep showing up, FP1 and FP2, oh, well, actually they're managing processes right now. I don't know if that's because you're trying to interact with us. But the stuff also that we might be most interested in is holistic sensation. Let's have a look. That's C4. So we're looking for this kind of area here. So we're looking for any kind of movement here. Well, there is some fluctuations going on there. But plenty of, well, smiling going on. I think that's it. And Paul, well, his heart rate's going. Let's move on to, I think, the pièce de résistance, some Melton Mowbray pork pie, please. If there's any food scientists in the room, I would like to talk about the effects of pork, because obviously it's quite a complex thing. There's carbohydrates, there's pork in it. I mean, it says here that pork provides an amino acid called tyrosine, which boosts dopamine, which I'm interested in because that's pleasure related, and norepinephrine levels. So, but also will help to boost brain messages that can help to make you alert and focused. Are you eating? Oh yes, please do. Sorry. But then carbohydrates can make you feel a little bit sluggish as well. I do think there's some activation with Paul watching. Definitely there. But it's funny, every time that Louise eats, the brain does seem to go pretty mad. And that's what I'm interested in. What would I link those areas to? The next course is, if you wouldn't mind pouring some, there you go, innocent strawberry. Now I should have been saying that obviously looking back here, I did buy all these from Ocado. They did get delivered to my door last night. That was actually a little bit stressful. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, I haven't put them out. Excuse me, one moment. The innocent spoon is quite important because it contains bananas, which I think it's the potassium bananas which seems to have supposedly a calming effect on the neurological system. So the Manchego cheddar only got 3 out of 5 on the ratings. How was it? Was the Manchego quite nice, Louise?
Very nice.
Okay, that's good. And the pork pie, would you recommend that to a friend?
Quite salty.
Quite salty, okay. So now we're on to the bananas, which contain tryptophan, a type of protein that the body converts into serotonin, which makes you relax. So if you wouldn't mind, I've no idea how long it takes for foodstuffs to take effect on the body, but I think it's actually the idea of consuming after hunger, which is probably at this point most interesting to me. And again, I haven't been pointing out, but there are, as she drinks, the thrill level is creeping up as long as...
Sugar.
Yeah, you can tell that in there. And I think the very final one, I think we should move into the final piece. Oh, off there. Montezuma Lordy Lord chocolate. It was the most chocolatey chocolate I could find, which contains chocolate nibs, if you're interested. And it doesn't quite describe what they are, but I think that's probably just pockets of pure cocoa, but supposedly still not bitter. So if she likes chocolate, I think, let's see. Please do. And, you know, chocolate does contain opiates, which are, I think they said something like, if you were to eat 25 pounds of chocolate, you get the same effect as smoking a joint. I've only got 100 grams, but again, you know, she is going quite mad off the scale here. Now, poor old Paul, he's not been eating very much, has he? So I think, maybe, what would be your favourite piece, Paul? What would you like? One thing. Yeah, just a bit of chocolate. So as Paul tucks into a bit of chocolate, I'll move on to my final points. So returning back to the original questions that I posed myself, I don't think I fully answered them, but how does food thrill? So as we've seen, food can play, well, particularly in my own practice, I've seen that food can play a role in its purest form, as we've just seen here, as a chemical cocktail that enters the body, which causes physiological and has psychological effect. Or, as I showed in the case of the fairground, food can be used as an element in the construction of a larger emotional experience. Or in the case of my performances, food itself can play a crucial part, a crucial role in an unfolding narrative. And how can I create thrilling food-related experiences? Well, the opportunity to speak at Food Design 2012 has given me the chance to reflect on the taxonomy of thrill, on the rules that I was trying to set myself to help me construct new thrilling experiences. And it's allowed me to look at that again through a food-related lens. Now, I think I'm quite confident that food and food-related stuff, in its many guises, is going to throw up and continue to throw up a whole myriad of opportunities to become components in the construction of thrilling experience. I hadn't spotted it, I hadn't thought about it in my own work, but it's clearly there. And now I'm conscious of it, it'll become probably an even more important part. And I'm genuinely quite excited to see what everybody else has got to say about food, because obviously it's all going to be the stuff that will be incorporated into the design of future thrilling experiences. Thank you very much. Carry on eating, you're fine, Graham. Any questions? I don't know how you want to manage. Yes.
Is there any difference, I've watched the activation of the brain,
Yeah.
and I think with the chocolate was much more with the women than with the men. Is there, have you tried out if there are certain foods that activate women's brain more than men's brain? Or?
So at this point, I would say I'm not a scientist, but it's kind of like, but no, but seriously, this for me is a really good question. We tread a fine line. So I am part of a research group at the University of Nottingham, a group of computer scientists, psychologists, and if we were going to conduct a thorough study, we would need tens, if not hundreds, of subjects. We would conduct these experiments. So I'm looking, I suppose in my own personal experience, I'm looking for anecdotal evidence that as a designer, I feel I possibly need to be inspired by science, but I don't need to, I suppose, make the science. But if that became an important point, I'd say, in my work, the differentiation between male and female, and I know in physiology, I don't know about neurology, but physiology, definitely there are differences between male and female reactions. I would try and hunt down a scientist who knows. I mean, it's a bit of a weak answer, but that is what I did. I'd find somebody to answer the question for me. So, I don't know. Yes?
Yeah, I think I'm probably the food scientist. Very, very interesting. It's really exciting stuff, and I suppose I know vaguely some of these sorts of things that people have been doing. And certainly on the physiological side, Andy Taylor at Nottingham has been doing a lot of stuff in this research on the central side. But what was interesting, you were talking about the fact that on the fairground rides, thrills are only occurring 4% of the time, and the rest is setting up the experience.
Yeah.
I wonder whether with food you've thought about doing the same thing. For example, sound is incredibly important in the eating experience, and there are all sorts of sounds that go on in terms of preparation of the eating area and the noises that the food makes as well. So I wonder if you've thought about that dimension of sort of setting up the thrill that you get when you actually consume.
So I suppose I've never been wholly conscious of apart from Nearfile, which were conceptual design explorations, I've never actually designed or taken forward my work into my food-related interests into performance. So I've never considered wholly, but I know from my other performances that the sights, the sounds, the smells, even how an experience is first advertised, the very first experience that somebody entertains, the thought of doing that, the visual material, is all incredibly important to the setting up of the final act that people go, take for example, go to the fairground, people say it was going on that ride and it was that moment, that was it, but actually that only in time only represents a few seconds of the several hours of the visit. And so the lasting memory of the emotional experience or their trajectory is all that other stuff, and it is important. So if I were to design, let's say, a menu and actually hold a dining experience, they would be exactly the things I'd consider, yes.
You contact Heston Blumenthal?
You know what, I actually contacted Heston to see if he was interested in a copy of that illustration I'd made, and he wasn't really interested. But yeah, no, he's kind of cornered the market in food science, but I think, and I know he does some of the experiential stuff, but I think there's an awful lot more, a broader experience, which you were talking about there, to do with the sound and other elements that architects might be interested in, that experiential designers would be interested in, performers, etc. So I think it's a much broader consideration than just something that just one chef could do. I think there's an awful lot of people that would be involved, I think, in designing that experience.
Always stimulated.
Yes. Amuse-bouche.
Yeah,
Yes.
Amuse-bouche. Right. I was wondering if you had similar experiences in your studies where if somebody goes on the same roller coaster 20 times, does every time the amount of thrill decrease?
Yes. Novelty is one of the most important aspects of a thrilling experience, and repetition decreases novelty, and there is a marked drop-off in thrill. But in some of the experiments we conducted where you get people who've been riding rides 1, 2, 3 or 4 times, there's a drop-off. But then there are some people who ride rides for 50 to 200 times, they've been on that ride over the year, so ridiculous amounts of time. And there's something about their appreciation. So they're almost like the foodies of the ride world. And they start to appreciate the subtle nuances in the ride. the airtime they get, the little creaks at certain points of the ride, the community of people who've ridden that ride an awful lot of times. There's some social aspect to it. And I think it's more, when people first go on rides, it's the physical stimulation and the bodily arousal that is the most marked thing about it. As you become more experienced in riding, it's pleasure, it's sort of that hedonistic tone which becomes the dominant thing. People take delight in those subtleties of pleasure, I think, yeah. There was a project that I did for, was intended for Thorpe Park, which was a vending machine for Rita Queen of Speed, which was going to deliver those little gel taste strips, which are going to be layered, which were going to deliver different taste experiences. Once you got on the ride, as you put it in your mouth, it would deliver taste as you went around the ride. And my point being that they were looking at trying to redesign the ride, spending hundreds of thousands of pounds, and I said, well, actually, a really potent design change could be the introduction of taste and choreographed taste throughout the ride, which was, they never took it up. But yes, sorry.
There's a new ride in Universal Orlando where they choreograph music to the ride, and you can choose from 20 different songs, and they're all, the key points of the song are timed with the dips.
Nice.
So
Yeah. So it's bespoke ride experiences. Yeah, nice.
About the use of this with people with eating disorders?
It's so the very first project I showed you, the auto portrait of Fairground Thrill. The scientist I worked with, James Condren from Media Lab Europe, which is a spin out from MIT. It actually used a technology which was galvanic skin response, which looked at sweat levels on the hands, and that was developed, or that piece of kit was developed to try and train children with attention deficit disorder to play games where they were rewarded for being calm. And I think a lot of the medical techniques we borrow from are often situated, or of greatest advancements are obviously made in tackling those kind of issues. Yet I do make quite a clear distinction that I am possibly solely interested in entertainment. And sometimes people, think that's probably not a great thing to be, when it could be lots of, there are probably better things to be doing with my time. But still, with the British economy, I just say entertainment, it sells. It is a big industry. So there will be probably, I think at Nottingham, there are people who are associated with our entertainment-based research group who also will have interests in these other areas. So there are spin-outs both in and out of the kind of research we do.